Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here in Florence. I had hoped it would be sunny, but never mind, you can't arrange everything. In a virtual world, of course, the sun would shine. And certainly, thank you for hosting it in this wonderful setting. I'm going to talk fast. I've got quite a lot of slides. Annika set me this long agenda of things she wanted me to talk about, then said, don't use too many slides, don't put too many words on them, and don't spend more than however many minutes was talking. So here we go. Let's see how we get through. I'm going to talk in general a little bit about high level. I'm going to talk about Europe and the things that are going on in Europe. I'm going to summarize those quite quickly. And then I'm going to talk about my own university, not because I think there's anything special about us, but because I think it demonstrates, in a sense, the strategic approach that universities will have to take if they wish to become a new and different kind of university of the kind that we've been talking about this morning. And they're going to finish inevitably on the downside, which is, yeah, but what about the present, and how do we get there, and the challenges that we face? And again, some of those questions came up for us this morning too. So, does that work? Yeah. Okay. So I've got an opening position statement because Annika said, say something that surprises people or whatever. Now, actually, if I said this in my own university, if I collected a random group of professors around and put them in a room and said that, they would lynch me. Okay, so, you know, I stand here and talk about digital education and the things we've done, but the truth is that in all universities, and this applies actually to the Open University True, where I worked for a long time, that there are conservatisms and resistances, if you like, and difficulties that one actually has to overcome. But in the future, as I see it, that lifelong learning, and that means in its broadest sense from the point at which probably you leave school, in a sense, until you stop learning and you die, that it will increasingly be taken online. And so no student should graduate from a modern university without some experience of learning fully online, not blended. And that as that mode of teaching becomes normal in universities, it will be normal for all professors to teach online as well as teach face-to-face. And that is the reality of the world that we're heading towards, and that's the reality of the world in which I have been designing my own university. I retired a few weeks ago, and so that's why my title slide says Emeritus Professor rather than Vice President Digital Education. So there's a timeline, therefore, starting from now that goes to a point at which one reaches that position when, for any given university, it is teaching online, it is balancing its online and its traditional and its blended education. And the questions for us are, how fast do you want to go? How much of this do you want to do? Where is your balance between the on-campus residential and the fully online and the blended? And how are you going to get there? I have to say that my view for my own university was and still is that 20XX, 2030 is the latest by which we should be there, and ideally we would be there by 2025, in other words, 10 years from now. And so those little markers along that line, 2016, to me, say 2030, means that we should be making serious steps as we do our planning every 3 years or so, our rolling planning. We should see in that planning serious concrete steps that take us towards the end point, because if they're not there, we won't be there. So, I said that I would talk a bit about Europe, and you know, my own university, despite the fact that it's in a country that's about to leave the EU, is not leaving Europe. It is a traditionally European university. 40% of our students do not come from the UK. A very large number of them actually come from Europe. And we have many relationships and collaborations with European universities. It's clear that in Europe, at policy level, there is a strong concern about what is seen as a slow, an unduly slow, perhaps a lethally slow progress from the traditional ways that learning and teaching has been done to this rather ill-defined and sometimes really quite undefined 21st century teaching and learning in universities. And we undertook a study, as just been mentioned, called The Changing Pedagogical Landscape. And when we sat down with the EC team that commissioned us to do the work, I said, so what's the vision about where you think we ought to be that we are writing this report into? And the answer is that there is no vision that's concrete enough for universities to work to. And that is one of the challenges, that what should you look like, not like now, but there is no definition of what a 21st century university will look like, although we have actually had conversations here that would lead us in that kind of direction. But nevertheless, statements like the Yerevan statement from the Ministries of Education, reports like modernizing higher education, and etc. All of these things are pointing to a serious angst with the way higher education is in learning and teaching, but actually when you read them to find a definition of what it should be like, you find a vacuum. And I think that's a serious problem for universities planning into a future in the political settings in which they are. There are, of course, and I started out by saying this, there are, of course, many in the university sector who actually feel we're moving too fast towards all this funny online learning stuff. You know, MOOCs are the sign of the devil, and you know, life is changing too fast. So we've got these two polarized camps. If you sit in a senior strategic position, there's one, there's where are you trying to get to, and the other side is hey, we're moving too fast away from the ways that we always used to do things. And as a strategic planner, you have to be able to work in those two different worlds, a foot in each of those camps. But things are changing in Europe. I mean, I take just one of the surveys that's been done. This comes from the European University Association. It's got 800 members. It surveys them regularly about things, and I've picked the data out from their 2015 survey. And although I'm pretty sure that sitting back there, you can't read any of that because it's kind of blurry and you'd need binoculars anyway, I'll just mention one or two of the top points, that around 25% of the universities that responded to this, and there were, I think, about 300 and odd universities out of in the sample, about 25% of them said that they were using online education as a way of flexing time and space. In other words, getting away from the idea that you had to study when they said and had to study where they were. And a fifth of them were doing it specifically to enable off-campus learning. So a population, therefore, that have actually engaged to some significant degree, many of them have clearly not got there yet, but a rising number year on year that are adopting some degree of onlineness. And that around half of the universities that responded said that they were offering, to some extent, blended education. And about half of them said that they were offering some degree of online. So we can see that over time, universities are moving into a position in which they are beginning to balance this traditional learning and teaching with online learning and teaching and some hybrid in between. And it's a major change from 5 years ago when very few people universities responded in that way at all. So it will be interesting to see what that measure is another 5 years from now as to whether the universities of Europe have indeed begun to shift into adopting online learning. The most dramatic of the shifts that we saw, of course, was when MOOCs appeared. And I've just put one or two data samples on there. Again, EUA surveyed and continues to survey MOOC offerings from universities around Europe. And most European countries, despite this view that European higher education was laggardly and terribly traditional, actually European universities engaged at least at the level that American universities did, if you measure it as a percentage of the universities that exist. So the idea that Europe was slow and America was fast, actually in percentage terms, it doesn't really bear scrutiny. And that in a variety of countries in Europe, there was a national level reaction to MOOCs. Indeed, I actually say that one of the most important things that we saw as a consequence of MOOCs coming in was that it woke up governments to the idea that they needed to think about and engage and perhaps devise, as they did in Norway, strategy to deal with the changing nature of higher education and what it actually meant. And so I think that we've now moved to a point in terms of technology, and I know that there will always be new technologies, there will always be technologies which would make some things easier, and some of them have been mentioned this morning. I think that we have reached a point at which there are sufficient online tools available to do all of the things that we do in higher education and at high quality, so that there's no excuse, if you like, for any university not using them and not doing it. And I do emphasize the high quality element. This is not to do second-rate, poor quality higher education. This is to do higher education that is at least as good as on campus, and in my view, is often significantly better. And that includes MOOCs. And if we want to debate about MOOCs, I'll be happy to debate MOOCs later. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the University of Edinburgh, where we've got to, because I want to show you in the end where we are now and where we want to go. And then I want to look at what it takes to get there and the challenges that come through. And as I said, I don't think this is because we're particularly special, although I think that we are because we decided that innovation in education using technology was one of the key elements of our makeup. We have actually moved in the vanguard group rather than the slower group. So, a very short timeline. I mean, I've been doing e-learning, computer-based learning, all of those different names that it's changed through over the years for about 25 years. So this is not new. But for many universities, this is relatively new in terms of them grasping it strategically. But we have, since the early 90s, have strategically invested significant sums of money into programs that were designed to change the way we did our learning and teaching. The first of them was email, and actually that was the hardest was email, and we got more pushback on giving email to students than actually we got on anything else ever after. But it was informative in the sense that the deluge that academic staff, faculty thought was going to wash them away with email never came. That maybe says something about the passivity of our students, but nevertheless, it meant that I suppose that we were prepared then for the fact that the negatives that people predicted would happen probably wouldn't come to pass. So we introduced VLEs. We then had funding in 2003 in which we pushed for blended projects. And these were university-wide, strategically trying to make sure that they were in every faculty of the university and wherever possible at more than one academic level. In other words, although the projects were individual and were grassroots and people bid for them, there was a strategic view about how they would be assigned and how they would be run and how lessons would be learned and how they would be embedded. And that's quite different to the Thousand Flowers Bloom process that's happened in many universities where things have popped up and they've gone away. We wanted them to pop up, but we were certain that we did not want them to go away. 2006, we then made the step to say that we as a university would offer fully online degrees. And we had set a target of 10,000 master's students online, which would actually be about 50% of our master's population would be online students. And we wanted master's degrees online in every school of the university. We have now achieved about 90% of it. And that's by putting funding in, by putting incentives in, and by managing that program and learning the lessons across the board. At the moment, we've got to about 3,000 students, so we're about a third of the way through. And they are as international as the rest of our master's students. And so in 2012 then, when MOOCs came along, we jumped onto that one very quickly too. We've now got to the point at which 2.5 million people have enrolled on our MOOC programs, 120,000 certificates given. The return on investment has been enormous. It's not been a waste of money. We have gained many, many-fold as a consequence of moving into that area, in terms of reputation, in terms of research grant, in terms of publications, in terms of general student recruitment. The other thing that it did, though, was it injected a huge element of fun into learning and teaching. We have a queue of people wishing to make MOOCs because it's fun. It's unregulated. We don't have to worry about the quality assurance agencies. People can come and go and learn as they wish and contribute as they wish. It's been challenging for some academic staff because it's moved them into exactly the kind of space that we just talked about this morning, where the learners bring to that experience what they want to bring. They do in it what they want to do. They are responsible, mostly working adults. And the conversations and the activities that have gone in there have been hugely rewarding for the academic staff who have led them. So though that process of going through those strategic investments has led us to a point at which we have a university which I describe in this bubble diagram. 35,000 students we have, and almost all of them are on campus in residential education. So all of the things I've talked about, online learning, I've talked about MOOCs, are actually a really quite small part of our university business. The bulk of our university business remains on campus. We also have a lifelong learning division, which has actually been very productive over the years and strangely sat outside all of those developments of technology and is really quite technology poor at the present time. So this is where we are, and the question then is, what should we look like? What would the diagram look like for 2025? Because if you model that, for a start, you can test it on people, and if they reel back in horror, you know that you've got a problem, but also it's a reminder to you as to what progress you're making. So this is the model for the University of Edinburgh about 10 years from now. And residential education will continue, even 10 years from now, and slightly larger university. Residential on-campus education will continue to be the bulk of our business. So we are not turning into an online university, that's clear. But we will have expanded our off-campus substantially. In the master's area, we would never compete with the UK Open University for bachelor students. We're awful at student. Don't tweet this stuff. I got burned once when people tweeted things. Do not tweet anything I say. We are awful at on-campus student support, and so for bachelor students, and so therefore online we would be even worse. You have to be really good at student support to support novice learners. So this is at masters, but also at doctoral level. So we are now offering PhD at a distance based on the confidence we got from being able to do masters. Okay? The MOOC space will have expanded substantially, and we will have brought our open studies lifelong learning into that technology fold. But the critical bit is that that open bit, those blobs overlap. Quite different to now. The moment they're all very separate, but we envisage a future in which movement between non-credit bearing, credit bearing, short course and degree, and in all the directions you wish to go, would be a normal, not a major, but a normal part of the business. When somebody said, I've studied a MOOC with you, can I now come and take a degree? Our answer should always be yes, not no. So the default is that we actually allow people different paths to follow as they go through the system. To get there, I think, requires more of those serious experiments, those strategic experiments, experiments in which you say, we want to test this particular thing, and I've got a list of the sorts of things you might do, remote invigilation of exams, online taught degrees, increasing instructional design capacity, gaming, all of that stuff. You do them seriously and test them across the campus to embed them right across the board, not just a little bit here and a little bit there. You test them as pilots to scale. An important one for us is the one that I've got down there in red, which is learning analytics, because we see learning analytics as underpinning the support that we can give to learners to help them improve their learning, help us improve the design of our courses, and help them, and also to look for warning signs of impending failure. Most of our students do not fail, only a very small percentage, but we would like that percentage to be smaller. So we see learning analytics, and that Sheila project is something that we have running now, in which actually if any of you would like to join in, we're open to that. Learning analytics will underpin increasingly a lot of the things that we do as we work ourselves into this online age, and we feel that that is actually probably essential for everyone. But I said that I would finish with the negatives, and so there are some real challenges. This is one of them. that we talk a lot about e-learning, we talk about learning online, etc. Assessment is the Cinderella. And the reason why assessment is the Cinderella is that we found it really quite hard to keep the rigor that we expect in our examination systems with people that we never see and never meet. That there's a strong tradition of synchronous exams rather than exams on demand. And synchronous exams are really difficult to do with audiences that are scattered around the world. And I watch some of my colleagues struggling to do this, trying to design 4 different exams to be delivered so that, you can't get cheating. And I think that testing higher level learning outcomes is still difficult in the online space. It's time consuming and expensive. And so that is still a challenge for us. And finally, this is the list. And actually, it's interesting, in the session this morning, we touched on some of those things. There's a real durability in existing pedagogies. It's the lectures about how not to give lectures. The existing pedagogies are very durable. There's less student enthusiasm in the students who come to us for an online world than the hype would tend to lead you to think. And so we have to move with our student population. We can't leave them behind. But 2 that I've talked about with several people here near the bottom, interlocked curricula and the physical estate, are really hard for traditional universities to break free from. And so even with that strong vision, changing those is going to be a real challenge, even for a relatively well set up university. And so in conclusion, I'll give you a summary statement. I think that with clear vision for a future and with strategic investment, every European university can actually transform itself into becoming online, residential, and everything in between, open and closed, self-paced, all of that. But it's not going to be an easy road. And I will leave you with a tutorial in a digital environment. And that's it.
Thank you very much.